Welcome, engineers. My name is Travis IQ, and today we're going to talk about wireless network installs and wired installs, specifically troubleshooting. Travis, how are you going to show us wireless and wired troubleshooting installs when you don't have your green screen background? Today we're going to talk about troubleshooting and talk about some issues that I had installing a wireless upgrade in a small office environment. And I'll bring up some screenshots and things like that to supplement our discussion. But I wanted to talk specifically about troubleshooting. And troubleshooting issues are very site specific, right? But these troubleshooting issues can also be very ubiquitous. So you'll see a lot of these types of issues in the same places, right? For example, lack of cable labels in wired environments. This happens all the time. You should follow some great cabling Instagram follows, things like All Green Lights and things like this. They're a wild tour and tutorial in how wireless and wired environments, and then subsequently wireless environments get all bungled up when they evolve over time and aren't labeled and aren't installed properly, right? So I wanted to talk about a couple of the troubleshooting issues that I had specifically in this job, right? And so what we had was a legacy wired and wireless system with a lot of cables and limited wireless connectivity in the office. And so what we were going to do is increase wireless connectivity and hopefully streamline some of the cable infrastructure and make things a little bit better labeled and a little bit easier to get through, right? First thing that we found is when we open the box up, right? It's just this is actually kind of part of the finished product, but what we found was a mess of cables in this thing. And we were not thrilled. So let's see if we can bring this thing up. What we found was a mess of cables in this thing, and we were not thrilled. And you can see that a lot of these cables were terminated or not terminated at all. So it is kind of a mess, right? That's the nature of this troubleshooting issue we're discussing. But as you can see right here, we've got an interesting issue, right? And that is I've got two Ethernet jacks, right? RJ45 male connectors to a female-to-female barrel connector in here. And what had happened was we had these cables right here were connected via circular like crimps, just electronic crimped wires. And it looked like they were just terminated kind of rounded off like these guys here, right? Well, this is actually connected to a keystone jack, but it looked like they were just kind of rounded off like these guys here, and then had just been crimped together just to keep the clutter and the mess right out of our way. And what had actually happened was when we were trying to determine where the cables were in the wall so that we could run cable through the walls, or didn't have to run cable through the walls for the wireless access points to other areas of the building, what we found was we weren't sure exactly where everything ran, and there were no labels. There was actually one label on here. You can't see it. It was on one of these purple labels, and it said kit. Yeah. What that actually was is the office kitchen, which was interesting. We had no idea because the labeling was so poor, but after we troubleshot a bunch of the wires, that's what we found. These are the things that you'll run into when you have really poor cabling, right? And so what we did is we severed this cable right here. It was crimped together, right? And we just cut it because we were going to check the cables to see where they were going. What ended up happening was the broadband internet went away. And so what we had found is broadband had been piped into the office at a different spot, right? It had been connected to this junction box and then run through the junction box to the broadband cable modem in the primary office. And so it had just been crimped together. There's a number of reasons why this is bad. Most notably the fact that the wires are exposed and or completely untwisted for a long period of time, right? And per our networking fundamentals, right, we know that twisted pair cabling is going to reduce crosstalk and all these other things. So we immediately then decided to re-terminate the cable, right, and get it all up and going. And so that's fine. But what we didn't actually have the barrel connector that we needed, and so we just kind of terminated it to keystone jacks and then used a patch cable. And we actually had it kind of cut back a little bit further. We were just trying to get it up and going so we could do some more troubleshooting. And what we noticed was that the speeds, when we speed tested it, went like way down, which makes a whole lot of sense, right? And then finally, at the end, we went back through and cleaned this thing up, and then got a speed test that was much more indicative of the 1 gig up and down that the office was paying for. Just one great example of some troubleshooting issues you can run into in the real world, right? This is the real world, people. Yeah. And so again, you'll see all these messed up cables, and a keystone jack terminated there. Now, again, this wasn't a huge structured cabling job, and so there was just a bunch of leftover stuff that we just chose to leave, and we choose to leave in this case. But you can see we did mount a Unify switch in here, and what we ended up doing was, while I just leave this up here, what we settled on was what they originally had was just some Netgear gear and a wireless bridge. Or repeater, really, right? And so what we decided to do was replace this stuff with all new Ubiquiti stuff. So we had 2 access points, a Dream Machine, and a 4-port PoE switch. It's actually an 8-port switch, but with 4 PoE ports to power the access points, and a couple extra ports if we needed it for anything in the future. What we ended up finding is, if I come back up here to my access points, again, more troubleshooting issues. These are things that, unless you tested all the hardware and things like that ahead of time and had, a much more thorough plan going in, which isn't always the case, and it was not in this case. We had 2 access points, and one of the access points was bad. One of the good things about this, because we overspec'd the wireless infrastructure pretty significantly, because we wanted to spec it for upgrades, for added hosts and distance coverage. What we found was, a single access point, at least for this time being, would be sufficient, and then we'll just replace the access point once we get a new one in. So we're waiting on a new access point, but these are the things, right? Bad labeling, mislabeled cable, or things that you should never do with cabling, bad access points, and difficulty running wire through walls. Let's check this thing out. So if we look up in here, this is actually an image that I took as we were trying to pull cable through this wall. If you look up in here, what is all this stuff? Why is there so much stuff in this wall? I don't know. I didn't do any of this cabling previously, right? And as these things evolve over time, years and years of this stuff, it's going to occur this way. So I'm not saying it's the worst scenario. It's not ideal, but what I am saying is this is definitely something that you'll run into. So difficulty running cable through walls as a result of the walls being full of cables, bad labeling, difficulty in working in the termination boxes and things like this. Okay. So what's the end of the story? The end of the story is we had bad access points, difficulty running cable, mislabeled cable, misconfigured broadband and Ethernet access to your broadband cable box, and poorly terminated cable at that inside the termination box. All of these things lead us to what would end up being a longer job. Right? Something that could have potentially been, an hour or 2 turned into several hours as a result of all these issues. This is not to say that that's not common. It is, right? But it's something to point out, things to understand. Troubleshooting is probably my favorite part of the entire business, right? When things go wrong, although they do not, like anyone else, I would prefer things to go right. That's what makes this stuff interesting. Yeah. The only thing that I had left here for you was a couple of things. I did take a video on site to kind of show you the finished product and the Dream Machine in view. So we'll get to that in just a second. What I will show you is, so if we go negative 84 dBm prior, and if we know anything between negative 80 and negative 90 is, bad signal on the other side of the office. And we look at right through this piece of Netgear equipment. If we look at now our new environment with the Ubiquiti network products, we're at minus 66 dBm, which isn't insane, but a significant improvement in wireless quality. If you also notice, if you wanted to go back and look at the channels, right, the first channel is channel 1, and the next one is channel 11 in this 2.4 gigahertz range, which is neither here nor there, but you do notice that they're using these non-overlapping channels 1 and 11, these types of things. Just things that you talk about from a fundamentals perspective and don't actually always see until you're doing implementation work like this. And last but not least, a speed test. We got 314 down, which is pretty good in a wireless environment, even if you're supposed to get a gig up and down, right? We will kick it back to the on-site video that I took. This is the small office we were working on. Let's see if we can get a little. Hey, how you doing there? Installed the Ubiquiti Dream Machine Pro, or not the Pro, just the regular Dream Machine. And then in here was a nightmare of cables. Unfortunately, we've already buttoned the thing up, but put a Dream Machine Pro, or the regular Dream Machine, installed 2 access points, and cleaned up some of the bad cabling that was in there as well. So really interesting stuff. As is always the case, engineer, break stuff, and have fun. If you liked the video, like and subscribe. We'll talk about more troubleshooting issues, all types of things, technical, networking, and security going forward.